Welcome, gents. Solitude is the price of greatness. Being alone and being lonely are two different things. A Sigma male understands this better than anyone. You've never fit neatly into society's boxes, and you never tried to. Your mind works differently, your standards are higher, and your tolerance for shallow connections is almost non-existent. This isn't a flaw, it's the price of being rare. But let's be honest, loneliness can be brutal. There are moments when the silence isn't peaceful but deafening, when the world feels distant and even in a crowded room you feel like a foreigner. This isn't weakness, it's the reality of walking a path few dare to take. Most people are terrified of solitude, but not you. You've learned to face yourself without distractions, to grow without applause, and to stand without a support system. That level of self-reliance is a double-edged sword. It makes you unstoppable, but also isolates you. The question is, will loneliness break you? Or will it forge you into something even stronger? This is what the loneliest Sigma males experience. It's not a pity story. It's a brutal, unfiltered look at the path you walk and why it might just be your greatest strength. Let's get started, gents. And number one, knowing that even his loneliness has layers. Loneliness isn't just one thing, it isn't just the absence of people. If that were the case, it would be easy. Just step into a room full of people, start a conversation, and let the loneliness fade. But he knows better. There's the simple loneliness, the kind most people understand. The kind that creeps in when he's physically alone, when there's no one to call, no one to share a moment with. It's real, but it's also the most shallow kind of loneliness. He's used to it. Then there's the loneliness of being surrounded by people who don't get him. This one is worse. He could be sitting at a table with friends, listening to them talk, but inside he feels like he's in another world. The topics seem surface level. The jokes feel forced. The connection, if there ever was one, feels paper thin. He plays along, nods at the right moments, but deep down, he knows he doesn't belong. But the deepest, most cutting kind of loneliness, it's the realization that no matter how well he explains himself, no matter how many words he carefully chooses, no one will ever truly understand him. Not the way he understands himself. He could spell it out, break it down, make it as clear as possible, but there would still be a gap between what he says and what they hear, a gap between his world and theirs. And so he stops explaining, stops trying, because what's the point? Most people don't want to understand, they just want something that makes sense to them, so he stays quiet. Not because he has nothing to say, but because he knows that some things, some depths are meant to be carried alone, and somehow he's made peace with that. Number two, the pain of outgrowing people so fast that no one can keep up. Growth is supposed to be a good thing, but for the Sigma male it comes with an unexpected cost. He outgrows people so fast that no one can keep up. It's not that he wants to leave people behind. In fact, he starts every connection with hope. Hope that maybe this time someone will match his pace, his depth, his hunger for growth. But it never lasts. While others settle into routines, content with surface-level conversations and stagnant thinking, he keeps evolving. His mind sharpens, his vision expands, and suddenly the people he once valued start feeling like anchors, holding him back from where he's meant to go. At first he tries to slow down, to meet them where they are. He bites his tongue in conversations, pretending he's still engaged. He holds back his thoughts, avoiding the discomfort of being the one who always sees more, understands more, wants more. But eventually the disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. They talk about the same things, complain about the same problems, chase the same distractions, and he realizes they aren't growing, but I am, so he walks away again. The cycle repeats itself over and over. Every time he thinks he's found his tribe, he outpaces them, and with every step forward, the loneliness grows. It's not just about losing friends. It's about realizing that the higher he climbs, the fewer people there are to climb with him. People call him distant, detached. Some even resent him for changing, but what they don't understand is that he had to. Staying the same would have been a betrayal of everything he stands for. Loneliness becomes his constant companion, not because he enjoys it, but because he refuses to shrink himself to fit into spaces he has long since outgrown. He moves forward alone, not because he wants to, but because he has no other choice. Number three, the quiet acceptance that no one is coming to save him. There comes a moment when the Sigma male realizes no one is coming. No one is going to swoop in, recognize his struggle, or pull him out of his solitude. There's no hero, no perfect friend who suddenly understands him, no hand reaching through the darkness to offer rescue. He is entirely on his own, and that's a hard pill to swallow. Most people hold on to the hope that eventually someone will see them for who they truly are, that maybe, just maybe, they'll find a person who understands their depth, their silence, their unspoken battles. But for the Sigma male, that hope fades over time. He watches as people misinterpret him, as shallow connections disappoint him, as the world continues moving, oblivious to his isolation. So he faces the brutal truth. He either learns to live with the loneliness or he lets it break him. There is no in-between. At first, this realization stings. It feels unfair, almost cruel, but then something shifts. Instead of letting loneliness consume him, he does something most people are too afraid to do. He embraces it. He stops waiting for external validation, stops searching for someone who gets him, and stops expecting the world to meet him where he is. And in doing so, he unlocks something rare, complete self-sufficiency. He builds himself up, not because he has support, but because he must. He becomes stronger, sharper, and more resilient than those who have always had a safety net. While others rely on external encouragement, he learns to create his own motivation. While others crumble under isolation, he uses it to refine himself. This is the turning point, the moment he stops waiting and starts fully owning his path. No one is coming to save him, and that's exactly why he becomes unstoppable. Number 4, the paradox of being misunderstood yet respected. To the outside world, the Sigma male is an enigma, self-sufficient, unbothered, and deeply independent. People respect him for walking alone, for never needing validation, for operating outside the usual social hierarchies. They admire his discipline, his ability to move in silence, and his refusal to conform. But admiration and understanding are two very different things. People see his independence and assume it's effortless, that he was simply built this way. What they don't see is the price he pays. The quiet moments of isolation that stretch too long, the unspoken frustration of never being truly understood, the slow realization that most people will only ever grasp a fraction of who he really is. They think he chooses solitude, and in a way he does, but not because he wants to be alone, because he refuses to water himself down just to fit in. He has tried to connect, to explain his thoughts, to express his view of the world. But time and time again, he is met with blank stares, shallow responses, or worse, misinterpretation. So he stops explaining, stops trying to be understood. He embraces the silence, accepts the distance, and carries on, knowing that while others may respect him, they will never truly see him. This is the paradox he lives with, respected from a distance, yet isolated in his depth. Feared by some, admired by many, but fully known by none. Number 5, accepting that his loneliness is both a curse and a gift. Loneliness is heavy. It presses down on him in quiet moments, in the spaces where most people would reach for a distraction, a conversation, or a familiar voice, but there is no one, and he has long accepted that. Yet, here's the paradox. This same loneliness that isolates him has also made him untouchable. While others depend on constant validation, he has learned to move through life without it. While most people build their identity around how they are perceived, he has stripped himself of that need entirely. The curse of loneliness is obvious. It lingers in the absence of deep connection, in the realization that few, if any, will ever truly get him. It's in the knowing that even in a crowded room, he will still feel like an observer rather than a participant. The conversations feel scripted, the relationships feel temporary, and worst of all, no one ever asks if he is okay because they assume he doesn't need anyone. But then there's the gift. His loneliness has sharpened him, made him see the world without illusions. It has forced him to think deeply, to question everything, to develop an independence that makes him unstoppable. He is free from shallow attachments, free from the weight of expectations, free from the exhausting need to be understood. Most people fear being alone because they don't know who they are without others. He does. He has sat with himself long enough to understand his own mind in ways most never will. And so he carries his loneliness not as a burden, but as a mark of who he has become. Would he trade it for a more conventional life? For the ease of belonging? No. Because at the end of the day, this solitude, this self-reliance, this edge, it belongs to him, and he wouldn't give it up for anything. Number 6, struggling to let people in because he sees through their masks. Most people go through life wearing masks. They pretend to be confident when they're insecure, act happy when they're breaking inside, and say what's expected instead of what's real. But he sees through it all. And that's exactly why letting people in feels impossible. It's not that he doesn't want connection. It's that he can't force himself to pretend. He notices the little things others miss. The flicker of self-doubt in their eyes, the way their laughter sounds rehearsed, the hesitation in their words when they try too hard to impress. He can sense when someone is being dishonest, not just with him, but with themselves. And that's where the problem begins. Because he doesn't fake things, he refuses to play along. He won't nod in agreement when someone is lying to themselves. He won't feed egos or entertain shallow conversations just to avoid awkward silence. And people don't like that. They want to be seen, but only in the way they choose to present themselves. They want validation, not truth. So he watches as potential connections fall apart before they even begin. People pull away because they feel exposed, unsettled by his ability to read between the lines. He doesn't judge them, but they assume he does. He doesn't attack their weaknesses, but they assume he sees too much. It's a lonely way to live, knowing that most relationships require a level of pretending he simply can't do. He could force himself to ignore the red flags, to overlook the falsehoods, to engage in the scripted performances everyone else seems comfortable with. But that would mean betraying himself. And so he keeps his distance. Not because he's cold, not because he doesn't care, but because he refuses to settle for anything less than real. And in a world where most people fear being truly seen, real is rare, too rare. Number 7, knowing he's too much and too little at the same time. He's a paradox, too much and too little all at once. He's too deep for the surface-level crowd. Small talk drains him. Mindless gossip and shallow conversations feel like a slow suffocation. He craves depth, meaning and substance, but most people are content skimming the surface. When he speaks, he says things that make people uncomfortable, forcing them to think, to question, and instead of appreciating it, they pull away, labeling him intense or too serious. But at the same time, he's too distant for those who crave emotional closeness. He doesn't do constant check-ins. He doesn't smother people with attention or words of affirmation. He believes in presence, in quiet loyalty, in showing up when it matters. But in a world that thrives on instant gratification and endless validation, his silence is often misinterpreted as indifference. He's too intense for casual connections. He doesn't entertain people just to pass the time. If he engages, he means it. If he invests, he's all in. But most aren't ready for that level of focus, that level of raw, undiluted energy. So they back away, calling him overwhelming, saying he thinks too much, that he takes things too seriously. And yet he's too reserved for those who need constant reassurance. He doesn't chase. He doesn't explain himself unnecessarily. If someone wants to leave, he lets them. Not because he doesn't care, but because he refuses to beg for attention. This frustrates people who expect a reaction, who want to see emotions spelled out for them. But that's not who he is. So he exists in a strange space, too much for some, too little for others. And somewhere along the way, he realizes that trying to be the right balance for everyone is impossible. So he stops. He embraces the contradiction. He accepts that he's not meant to fit neatly into anyone's expectations. Instead, he chooses the only thing that has ever made sense, being exactly who he is, no matter who stays or who leaves. Number 8, attracting the wrong people, pushing away the right ones. The Sigma male doesn't chase people, he never has. But that doesn't stop people from chasing him. His aura of mystery, independence, and quiet strength makes him a magnet. The problem? He attracts the wrong people. Manipulators, energy leeches, users, those who see his silence not as self-sufficiency but as an opportunity. They mistake his calmness for emotional availability, his solitude for loneliness they can exploit. They come to him with their problems, unloading their burdens without ever asking if he has any of his own. They seek his stability, his insight, his presence, but they never give anything back. And the worst part? They convince themselves that he needs them, when in reality they need him. Meanwhile, the people who might actually understand him, the ones who think like him, move like him, are often the ones he pushes away, not intentionally, but by default. His walls are high, built brick by brick through years of being misunderstood, used, or abandoned. Even when someone genuine comes along, someone who could match his depth, his first instinct is still to guard himself. He tests them, withdraws, observes. He wants to see if they will stay without him having to ask. But most don't. They misread his silence as indifference, his distance as rejection. They assume he doesn't want them in his world, when, in truth, he just doesn't know how to let them in. And so, the cycle repeats. He attracts those who drain him and repels those who might uplift him. The loneliness deepens, not because there's a lack of people around him, but because the right people never get close enough to see who he really is. By the time he realizes the pattern, it's already too late. He's become so accustomed to solitude that even when the right ones come along, he no longer knows how to reach for them. Number 9, the frustration of having no equal. There's a hidden burden that comes with growth, outgrowing people. And for the Sigma male, this isn't just an occasional frustration, it's a never-ending cycle. He invests in himself relentlessly, sharpening his mind, refining his skills, and expanding his perspective. But the higher he climbs, the lonelier it gets. At first, he tries, he engages in conversations, gives people a chance, and hopes, just for a moment, that he's found someone on his wavelength, but then it happens. The surface-level thinking, the predictable conversations, the lack of depth. He listens, nods, and waits for something, anything that challenges him, but it never comes, so he moves on. It's not arrogance. He doesn't think he's better than everyone else. He simply operates at a level most people never reach. He has trained his mind to think critically, to see beyond illusions, to question everything. He processes emotions differently, navigates life with precision, and refuses to settle for mediocrity. And because of that, finding a true equal, someone who not only keeps up but pushes him further, is rare. Most people are content with comfort. They repeat the same conversations, chase the same distractions, and avoid the kind of self-interrogation that he thrives on. He isn't interested in small talk, empty validation, or relationships that exist just to fill time. He wants depth. He wants challenge. He wants someone who forces him to think, adapt, and evolve. But those people are few and far between. So he walks alone, not because he wants to, but because he refuses to slow down for the sake of companionship. He won't dilute himself just to fit in. He won't pretend to be satisfied with shallow connections. The downside, it gets exhausting. The constant cycle of meeting people, realizing they can't keep up and moving on. The disappointment of outgrowing relationships faster than they can even take root. But the upside? He remains sharp, he remains focused. And when he does find someone who matches his energy, it's not just another connection. It's something rare, something real, something worth waiting for. Number 10, the emotional scar tissue from being the strong one. No one checks on him, not because they don't care, but because they assume he doesn't need it. He's the rock, the one who never stumbles, never complains, never breaks. But what people fail to understand is that even the strongest foundation cracks when the weight becomes too much. The Sigma male has spent his life being self-sufficient, carrying his burdens in silence. He doesn't ask for help, doesn't seek sympathy, and doesn't show weakness. And because of that, people take his strength for granted. They lean on him without ever stopping to wonder, who does he lean on? The truth? No one. He has built walls so high that even if someone wanted to check on him, they wouldn't know where to start. He has mastered the art of masking his struggles, so by the time anyone realizes he's suffering, it's too late. He has already handled it alone. But there's a price to this kind of resilience, emotional scar tissue. Over time, his ability to feel softens, then hardens, then fades. He gets used to suppressing his emotions, to brushing off pain like it's nothing. He becomes desensitized, not because he wants to be, but because he has to be. When no one offers comfort, he learns to live without it. When no one reaches out, he stops expecting it. And that's the real danger. Not that he's alone, but that he starts believing he's meant to be alone. That vulnerability is a liability that no one would understand even if he did open up, so he stops trying. People will call him distant, cold, even emotionless. They won't realize that beneath his silence is a man who has been strong for so long that he no longer remembers what it feels like to not be. Even mountains erode when left to the mercy of time. But the Sigma male, he doesn't erode, he adapts. And in doing so, he becomes something unbreakable. Not because he's invincible, but because he's had no choice. Number 11, a deep awareness that no one is really paying attention. People admire his strength, they praise his independence, they call him different, focused, unshakable. But what they never ask is, what does it cost? The Sigma male moves through life with a quiet understanding that most people don't truly see him. They see the surface, the confidence, the self-sufficiency, the ability to stand alone, but they never look deeper. They never ask what it feels like to exist in a world where no one truly checks in, where no one stops to wonder if the strong one is actually okay. He knows the truth. If he pulled back, if he disappeared for a while, most people wouldn't even notice. Not out of malice, not because they don't care, but because they assume he doesn't need to be checked on. He has never been the type to demand attention, never the one to beg for company or validation, so the world gives him exactly what he asks for, distance. At first it doesn't bother him. After all, he chose this path. He values solitude. He enjoys his own company. But over time, the realization sinks in. If no one is truly paying attention, do I even exist in their world? It's not loneliness in the traditional sense. It's not about wanting more friends, more conversations, or more social interactions. It's about something deeper, the human desire to be seen, to have someone notice without being told. But that rarely happens. So he stops expecting it. And that's where the real shift happens. He stops caring whether anyone is paying attention. He detaches fully from the need for recognition. He operates on his own time, by his own rules, with no concern for who's watching. They may never notice if he disappears, but that's their loss, not his. Because while the world was busy overlooking him, he was busy building something far greater. Complete self-mastery. And that is worth more than any fleeting validation. The final truth about the loneliest Sigma males. Loneliness is not their weakness, it is the fire that forges them. While others are distracted by the noise of the world, seeking approval, chasing validation, and fearing solitude, the Sigma male stands apart. Not because he wants to, but because he must. His mind operates differently. His soul is wired for something deeper, and that comes with a price. Yes, it's frustrating to be misunderstood, exhausting to outgrow people, and painful to walk a path few will ever understand. But here's the truth. If he weren't different, he wouldn't be who he is. If he fit in, he wouldn't be extraordinary. And if the world understood him easily, he wouldn't be a Sigma. There's no rescue coming, no perfect person who will suddenly get him, no crowd waiting to applaud his journey, and yet that's exactly what makes him untouchable. He doesn't need any of it. His strength comes from within, his validation is his own, and his solitude, it's not a prison, it's an advantage. Because in the silence he sharpens his mind, in the stillness he builds his own path. So to the loneliest Sigma males, keep walking. Not because you have to, but because you were built for this. Your solitude is not empty space, it's the foundation of your power. Your difference is not a curse, it's proof that you were never meant to be ordinary. You don't need to be understood. You don't need to be accepted. You only need to be undeniable. And that's exactly what you are. Thank you for watching, gents, and God bless you.